All right, so how's it going out there? So you bought a new chart plotter or fish finder. Well, now what? Now you have to get it installed. And you can go down and have a professional install it, but if you're gonna do it yourself, let's go over a few basics of best practices for installing your new unit. So let's go ahead and get to it. All right, so there's 5 main things we're gonna go over today. We're gonna go over voltage drop, cable routing, transducer placement, equipment location, and how to make your connections. So first off, let's start out with battery voltage. Now, voltage drop is not associated totally with the amount of voltage in your battery. You can have a fully charged battery that's, the best lithium ion on the market, and you can still experience voltage drop if your wire's too small. So it's not necessarily all about your battery. Now, your battery is going to control how long you're going to be able to run your chart plotter, but it's not necessarily going to control your voltage drop. So there's a couple different things the voltage drop affects. Number one, it does affect the performance of the unit. If the unit's not getting the proper voltage, your images aren't going to come back as clear and crisp, and they might even be all chopped up. So if you're not getting the correct power to the transducer and signal back from the transducer to the unit, your images are going to be affected. The second thing is it will shut down your unit. And a lot of units shut down around 8 or 9 volts DC. And you may still have 10 or 11 volts in your battery, but because your wire is so small, you've got that voltage drop and it'll shut down your unit prematurely. So you want to make sure and get your wire sizing correct. Now, to do that, all the manufacturers are going to give you a wiring recommendation for your particular unit. And you want to follow that recommendation, but a lot of you out there, I know, bought multiple units. I have spoken with guys via email that bought 4 of the 106s. So we're putting a lot of units out there right now. So if you got 2 or 3 units on one particular circuit, you got to size that wire correctly for it. So depending on how you want to route it, if you want to route, a number 10 individually from the battery to each chart plotter, you can do that. Or there's an online calculator that I show you in this particular video that you can use to calculate what the overall size of the wire needs to be. So take a look at this video if you got multiple units. If not, just go ahead and follow your manufacturer's recommendations. So let's talk about how to route the cables through your boat, kayak, or wherever you're putting your chart plotter or fish finder. First rule of thumb is run your power cable away from your transducer and network cables. All right, so just for clarification, it is important to try to route away from the power cable going to your sonar unit, but that's pretty tough sometimes. But what you really want to avoid, you want to avoid the power cable running to your trolling motor or your power pole hydraulic pump, things like that draw a large amount of power. Those will really mess up your sonar image. If possible, route them on the other side of the boat. Now, at some point, they've got to come together. I realize that. So where you do, bring them up to your chart plotter or wherever. Don't coil them up together and make a nice, neat coil and tie wrap it. So don't do that. Try to keep them separated. Where they do have to cross, because they will have to cross, try to do it at a 90-degree angle if possible. But don't run them parallel all the way through the hole, because that'll pick up induction. So you don't want to do that. Go ahead and try to cross them at different places wherever they do have to come together, and just do the best you can right there at the chart plotter, realizing that you can't keep them separated, and you don't want to drill 2 different holes, in your console or through your deck. They can come up through the same hole. You just don't want to run them alongside each other all the way through the hole, okay? So just do the best you can with that. All right, you want to avoid all sharp edges and try to use a grommet where you come through where there's steel or metal, because boats vibrate a lot, so you're going to eventually wear through that cable. So you can buy rubber grommets and go ahead and drill your hole and put those rubber grommets in, or they have what's called edge guard. And edge guard works really good too, but something just to buffer those cables. So as you're going down through the water and causing a lot of vibration going down through the water, you don't have to worry about your cables rubbing on something sharp. You also want to plan for expansion. I know like my boat, it has an aluminum hull. So there are places in that boat that are gonna, expand and shrink depending on the water temperature or even the ambient temperature outside when it's in storage. So you don't want to pull those wires in real tight because something may cause the wires to pull up against something and, break a connector on the end of a chart plotter or something like that. So leave plenty of slack. Try to leave some little loops here and there so it's got plenty of room to move around in there while you're installing the cable. Okay, inside most chart plotters and fish finders, there's going to be what's called a ferrite bead. And the ferrite bead is put in there to try to cut down some of the interference from the electrical signal. Well, actually, where you want to put that, you want to put it on the transducer cable. So there's instructions on how to install those, but make sure and use your ferrite bead and put them on the transducer cable, not on the power cable, okay? So let's go ahead and move on. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about how to mount your transducer and how to level it up. And I put out a video on the leveling of the transducer that's pretty good. And you'll see those cards flashing, well, they might be flashing up here, but you'll see some cards. Those cards will take you to other videos that'll help you out. So go ahead and leave this video if you need to, and go take a look at those others and then come back. I've got a Double T Amazon fishing storefront on Amazon, and there's a link down in the description that has a lot of the different tools and materials that we're talking about during this video that might help you out. So go ahead and use that storefront if you want, and we'll go ahead and get started on transducer leveling. Okay, so the biggest thing that hurts your images is when your transducer gets air bubbles around it or any kind of turbulence, prop turbulence, things like that. When it gets those air bubbles around it, your images just don't come out. They're not even readable. So when you first mount your transducer, you may end up mounting it in the wrong place, and don't feel bad about that. I do recommend you go online, take a look at some people with similar hole designs or the same hole design that you have, and see where they put their transducer, and that'll give you a pretty good idea to where to put it right at first. Now, the other thing I recommend is buying a transducer mounting plate. They're only about $30, and that way if you get out on the water and you just can't get a decent image out of your chart plotter or fish finder, you can go ahead and move that thing around a little bit and drill some new holes, and you're not drilling holes in the hull of your boat. So those are really handy. Like I say, they're about 30 bucks, and I would definitely recommend getting one of those. So there is no magic pill for where to put the transducer. You can look up the boat manufacturer recommendations and look at the manufacturer of your chart plotter. Oh, I get this mixed up. Normally they're going to want it on the driver's side. I know I'm supposed to use a different term, but they're going to want it on the side where your steering wheel is, normally because of the prop rotation. So that's a good place to start. But remember, you're trying to keep turbulence and air bubbles away from that transducer. So when you do mount the transducer, it's designed to break away or flip up if you hit a rock or back into a dock or something like that, so it doesn't damage your transducer and the equipment. So what you got to be careful of is don't over tighten those. Most of them have a rubber cushion spacer on both sides of it, and if you over tighten that and lock it down, it won't be able to break up like it's supposed to or flip up like it's supposed to. Don't over tighten those, but you want them tight enough to where, they're not just going to flip up when you go up on plane or anything like that. So that may be something you have to play around with a little bit. But remember, they are designed to flip up when you hit an object. And that's something a lot of people don't know. And not all transducers are made that way, but most of them are. So you may be asking, how do I level my transducer? Well, your transducer, it's nothing really you can do in the yard before you go out and put your boat on the water. And there's a couple of different ways to do it. In this video, I show you a way where I'm using an app on my cell phone because my boat is really narrow. And when I'm sitting and driving, it actually, leans to one side quite a bit. So I wanted to go ahead and get it level both ways. And to do that, I used a bullseye. But there's also a torpedo level. You can use that. Take a torpedo level, and people suggest using coins, and get going about 4 to 6 miles an hour, idling along 4 to 6 miles an hour. And I'm going to tell you where I base that on is that's where my engine likes to idle. That's where I get the least amount of vibration. For a while, I was running it at about 7 miles per hour, but it would vibrate and my screen would sit there and shake, and it just wasn't real fun. So I backed it off, and of course I put my scroll speed in auto. So I didn't notice much of a difference in the image quality. So I'm kind of 4 to 6 miles an hour. Anyway, get going, and then you level up that torpedo level and you put coins underneath the one end of it. And then you can go ahead, take whatever coin combination you got, stick it in your pocket, and then when you get home, use your tongue jack to level the boat up to that same level that you had it at, and then just, level your transducer. It's pretty simple. And you may be asking, well, why do I need to level my transducer? I'm going over waves all the time and this, that, and the other. Well, I'm going to tell you, if you get your transducer close, at least you've got a midpoint there, and it does help. I didn't level my transducer at first, and my image quality was okay, but after I leveled it, I did notice a pretty big difference. And you got to realize that, when we first started out, especially all us guys with the gray hair, your transducer was about 2 inches long, and it really didn't matter nearly as much until side view came along. When side view came along, all of a sudden you've got these transducers that are, I don't know, what are they, 8 or 9 inches long now? And they really need to be somewhat level going through the water, or as close as you can get them. So do yourself a favor, get those things leveled up, and it's going to pay dividends in your image quality, I guarantee it. Now, if you don't have side view, if you just have a unit that has, traditional and clear view, it's not as important, but I would still get it leveled up because that clear view likes to be level. You got to realize that sonar angle on clear view and side view is just a sliver. It's not a round cone like you're used to seeing on the old traditional. It's just a sliver. So try to get it pretty close, but it's not near as critical as it is with the unit that has side view. Okay, so the next thing you're asking is, well, I'm going to mount it on my trolling motor. Yeah. Okay, so what I do with my trolling motor, the other thing about side view and clear view both, remember that cone angle is a sliver, okay? So it doesn't like to be turned. And you're turning your trolling motor all the time. So really clear view and side view is not a good application for a transducer that's mounted on a trolling motor. The clear view will work somewhat, and the side view, it will work, as long as you're going in a straight line, it'll do okay. But what I personally do, I use the transducer on my trolling motor for traditional only. That's the only thing I use it for. And then my console unit, which has the transducer mounted on the transom of the boat, I've got it networked with my bow unit. So when I'm up on my bow unit and I'm looking at my side view or my clear view, I'm actually getting that signal off the transom unit, not off the unit on the trolling motor. That's something to think about. And if you only got one unit and you mount it up on your bow, or whatever your vessel, your kayak, whatever it may be, that's something you may want to think about. If you're only going to run with one transducer and you want to use side view, you're probably going to want to put it in a place where the transducer is not going to get turned a lot, which is obviously not going to be your trolling motor. Okay, so I know some of you are going to say, I don't need to level my transducer, but you really may want to think about it. And the placement of it, go ahead and get one of those mounting plates. I don't personally have one, but I wished I did because I've ended up with about 6 holes in the hull of my boat, and I really hate that. So I suggest getting one of the mounting plates. Okay, so you need to put a little bit of thought into where you're going to mount your chart plotter or fish finder and other equipment, like if you have a network box, the black box, or something like that. Take some time to figure all that out. Remember, on your chart plotter, it is nice to be able to tilt and swivel, if possible, that thing to get out of different sunlight situations, unless you're going to go ahead and put one of those hoods over it, because the sunlight does make the screen hard to read. And if you leave that brightness cranked all the way up all day long, that screen gets really hot. It'll get hot to the touch. I've had several people ask me, should it get that hot? And well, mine does anyway, but go ahead and think about how you're going to mount it. Now, we've already covered the cables. The cables, you want to make sure that you've got plenty of slack, so when you do tilt or swivel or bouncing through the water, that those cables have room to move. And you want to be able to reach back there and take them off. So make sure your cables have got enough slack right there in the back of the unit. And what you're going to find, especially for rough water, is they need to be very secure. So don't take a little, half-inch screw and mount it down to the deck and expect it to stay there, because it probably won't. Especially the units up on the bow, they really get pounded in the water. Go ahead, especially on the bow-mounted units, and use some substantial screws or bolts or something to secure those units down. Some of you are probably going to go ahead and purchase like a beat down or a fold down type unit that goes up on your bow. And those are really, really nice, especially for you guys who are going to use live scope and you'll be looking at it all the time. The closer you can get that screen to you, the better off you're going to be. But remember, if you're going to fold that down, like when you pull up, you pull your trolling motor up and you put that strap across there, right? Because if that trolling motor deploys while you're doing 50 miles an hour, it's just going to rip it plumb off and you just lost your trolling motor. Well, kind of the same thing with these. You don't want to leave them standing up while you're doing 50 miles an hour in rough water. They just won't hold up, so they're going to be folded down. You want to make sure that when they fold down, they're on some kind of a leg or a pad to keep them off the deck so they don't sit there and hit the deck. The unit doesn't. And you want to go ahead, like your trolling motor, and you want to have a strap that goes across it so it stays good and secure. All right, now along with that, the units are water resistant. They're not submersible, okay? They're not submersible. So go ahead and try to plan on waves coming over the bow. So don't mount your unit, just right there on the deck. Make sure those waves have enough room to get up over so they don't splash directly in the back or in the front. Now, like I say, they should be able to take it, and a lot of the units have what's called a cradle. So you might get water into the cradle connections, and the cradle can be taken apart, the cradle can be replaced. But your unit itself, you really got to be careful that that screen is not, the screen and the buttons on the unit aren't facing where waves are going to come over and splash them. So like I say, they're not submersible, guys. Okay, so when you're routing your cables, and you guys have all seen it on a trolling motor, everybody likes to use tie wraps and they cinch them dudes down. Well, here's the problem. You can damage your transducer cable. So if you do use tie wraps, which I would say I would plan to avoid using them and try to use something like electrical tape or Velcro straps. I know it's hard, especially on that trolling motor, but try not to use those tie wraps, because what'll happen is if your transducer does go bad and they see those indentions from the tie wrap being cinched down, so try not to use tie wraps, and if you do, don't cinch them down tight, just, snug them down, and hopefully you won't have a problem with your unit's warranty. Now, I'm not sure about the warranty on all the manufacturers, but I do know that Garmin, they don't like it. If you send something in and it's got the tie wrap indentions on it, they're going to call you out on it. So anyway, let's move on. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to make the wire connections. When you got two wires that come together, I don't recommend using any kind of wire nut or temporary splicing. So go ahead and use something like an insulated splice cap, or solder is even better. So let's talk about some of those. Now, the best connections are a wire to wire, where you have two wires put together either soldered or twisted together, and then an insulated cap or something like that crimped over the top of them. Like I say, soldered with marine heat shrink put over the top of it. Something like that is best. For that reason, the center splice, where you put the two wires into the connector and then you crimp each side, that's not really a wire-to-wire connection. Now, some of the solder splices that you see, I did a video on those as a matter of fact, and I don't know. I don't really want to recommend them. I would still recommend just using regular solder and marine heat shrink. But anyway, getting away from that, the butt splices or the center splices where you put the two wires in, that's not a wire-to-wire connection. So there is more chance that those connections could become corroded. So anyway, that's something to think about. Okay, so when you do buy heat shrink, and I do like Harbor Freight heat shrink, but what I would do, if you've got the time to order some, go ahead and get some marine heat shrink that has the adhesive sealant already in it. And that's gonna make them pretty much waterproof. And you know, you can get a kit that's got all different sizes of that heat shrink, and it's not very expensive. I can't remember what I paid, but it seems like it was around $20, and it's pretty much a lifetime supply in there. There's a lot of different pieces of heat shrink tubing inside that. So that would be a good investment. Okay, it's always a good option to use silicone grease to try to cut down on that corrosion I was just talking about, especially where you have a crimp connection. But when you use silicone grease, use it sparingly. Don't gob it all over, because what'll happen is you'll go ahead and get dirt and debris will attract to it, and that can also cause problems. So use it sparingly. The way we use it in the electrical industry is we put it on and then we lightly wipe it back off, and you just leave a film on there. And that's what I recommend for using silicone grease. Okay, so here a while back, I did a pretty good video on making electrical connections that you may want to go ahead and watch. It's got some good information in it, a lot more detailed. I would check out this video next for more installation tips and tricks.